queer, called him a It just makes me feel like more of a freak.
It's not my fault you don't like girls.
I don't like girls.
Since season 4, a lot of people started to suspect something about Will's preferences. But honestly, we were all extremely blind, because ever since season 1, it was already pretty obvious that he didn't like girls. And what's even more surprising is that Jonathan and Joyce already knew long before anyone else. So I decided to rewatch the entire series of Stranger Things to find all the clues they left us about Will, long before he ever said it himself in season 5. Get ready, because this video is about to get good. The very first clue about Will's preferences appears in the first episode of season 1. Oh yeah, this early and nobody noticed. After poor Will disappears, Joyce goes to Hopper to report him missing. And the way she describes Will is what gives us our first real clue. She says Will is different.
He's not like most.
But she doesn't say it as an insult. She says it like someone who truly knows him. She describes him as a sensitive kid, someone who doesn't fit in, someone people make fun of and give nicknames to. She also says he doesn't like hockey, he's not rough, he's not aggressive, he's not like the other boys of that time, and definitely not what his father wants him to be. But the most shocking and revealing part of this scene is something else. Joyce mentions that Will's dad used to call him homophobic slurs for being more fragile.
Say he was queer, called him a
Is he?
Right here, we already had very clear clues about Will's preferences. Now get ready, because by episode 2, they had already shown us that Jonathan knew exactly what was going on with Will. In one of his memories, Jonathan asks Will if he really liked baseball or all those activities their dads try to force on him. Will answers no, that he wasn't interested in any of that at all. Then Jonathan says something really important. He tells him that he doesn't have to do things just because someone else wants him to, and that he doesn't have to force himself to fit in.
And you shouldn't like things because people tell you you're supposed to.
Jonathan truly wants to support his brother. He already knew that Will didn't feel comfortable with those masculine things people expected from him. That's why he never judges him. He just understands him. And this is something that repeats throughout the entire series. In episode 4 of season 1, after the ceremony where everyone says goodbye to Will, Troy and his friend go back to doing what they do best, making fun of Will. But this time, it's not just any joke. When Mike approaches them to confront them, Troy doesn't even try to apologize. Instead, he throws out a pretty harsh line. He says that Will is now in fairyland.
Will's in fairyland now, right? Flying around with all the other little fairies.
They mocked him using words associated with femininity and being gay. That was the way in towns like Hawkins, people labeled someone as different. They did it in a very cruel and disrespectful way. And this makes something very clear. Will was already seen this way even before he disappeared. In season 2, from the very first episode, Will isn't just seen as different anymore. He starts to believe in himself. There's a key scene where Jonathan walks into his room and discovers that kids at school call him the zombie boy. And this is where something very important happens. Will tells his brother that yes, he really is weird.
It just makes me feel like more of a freak. I am.
So yeah, Will is convinced that there's something different about him. And this is exactly where Jonathan, once again, proves that he always knew. Because instead of correcting him or telling him that he's not different or weird and that he's actually normal, he tells him that being weird is not a bad thing, that it's actually better than being normal. And season 2 has a key point about Will that now is very obvious. In the following episodes, Lucas and Dustin are completely obsessed with Max. But Will is the only one who feels absolutely nothing for her. Back then, it might not have been that obvious, but now it really is. Later, in episode 8 of season 2, we get Will's rainbow ship. While Joyce is trying to pull Will out of his trance, she talks about a memory. A drawing Will made with some crayons she had given him. Will had drawn a huge, colorful spaceship. He called it the rainbow ship.
And you drew this big spaceship, a rainbow ship.
And this isn't just any random drawing. It's the show itself using rainbow colors to represent this side of Will. During this same trance, we also have Mike. Always Mike. Because the moment that truly brings Will back isn't just anything. It's when Mike talks about how they met and how important Will was to him. And that's when Will comes back. Coincidence? I think not, my friends. Because by this point, we already know what Will felt for Mike. In the final episode of Season 2, during the school dance, Will tries to fit in. He dances with the girl, but he looks uncomfortable, like someone just acting because he's being forced to. Meanwhile, all the other kids are having the time of their lives dancing with girls. Lucas and Max kiss. Mike and Eleven do too. But Will, he just stands there, like a robot, dancing with the girl. In Season 3, they completely stopped being subtle and go all in on pain and drama. Here, they clearly wanted to be more obvious about what Will was feeling. In the first episode of Season 3, after Jonathan comes back all kissed up by Nancy, Joyce jokes with Will about when he's gonna fall in love. But Will answers that he never will.
I'm not gonna fall in love.
And he says this because at this point, Mike only spends time with Eleven. There's no chance anymore for Will to be with his crush. On top of that, the group is losing interest in playing Dungeons & Dragons with Will, which makes him feel even more excluded. And when Will destroys Castle Byers, it's not just a tantrum, it's because he feels like Mike is abandoning him for Eleven. It's a representation of Will's broken heart, not an immature kid throwing a fit. Cause if we really think about it, since Season 1, Mike and Will were shown as best friends. Mike always supported Will, and was the one who seemed most worried about him and his possessions. If you ask me, Will was left pretty confused by the way Mike treated him, because Will already saw him as more than just a friend. When Eleven shows up, all of that attention Mike used to give Will completely disappears. And in episode 3 of Season 3, Mike says a line that completely shatters Will's heart. After Will gets angry because his friends pay more attention to their girlfriends, he runs off, and Mike runs after him. In the middle of the argument, Mike yells at him,
"It's not my fault you don't like girls."
After that argument, Will starts to accept that Mike doesn't love him the way he thought, and that the chance of being with him simply doesn't exist. And with that, the show makes it clear that maybe the characters themselves have their suspicions about Will, but for some reason or another, they didn't want to accept it. And by Season 4, all the clues become much more visual. In episode 2 of Season 4, when Mike arrives to visit Will and Eleven, we can clearly see that Mike is way more excited to see his girlfriend than to see Will. Meanwhile, Will is genuinely excited to see Mike. He even tries to get Mike to hug him, just like he did with Eleven. But now that they're older, we see Mike starting to put distance between himself and Will. Maybe he already felt that something was off. These scenes really break your heart once you understand them. On top of that, poor Will brings a drawing for Mike that he doesn't even dare to give him because of Mike's indifference. Still, he keeps looking at him when Mike isn't paying attention. He looks him up and down, and you only do that with someone you truly like. Looking back at it now, it was an extremely subtle detail that very few people noticed at that time. Poor Will. At this point, even a random street mascot would give you a hug before Mike does. But after that, the most painful moments arrive. When Jonathan takes them to the skating rink, we see how all of Mike's attention goes straight to Eleven. Jonathan notices this and tries to cheer Will up, but Will just watches them from afar with sadness and resignation. Will truly felt excluded. Later on, Will finally builds up the courage, and during an argument with Mike, he confronts him. He tells him that he wrote to Eleven more than to him, and that Will has only been a third wheel between them.
Well, what about us? What? Elle has like a book of letters from you.
That's because she's my girlfriend, Will.
Ouch, that one really hurt. Obviously, in this moment, Will is completely destroyed, because he is forced to understand, in the worst way possible, that his love is not reciprocated. But Jonathan already knew. He already knew that Will was in love with Mike. Through these scenes, the show makes it clear that Jonathan fully understands the situation. He tries to cheer Will up. He tries to pull him away from Mike and Eleven so they won't keep hurting him. And he quietly watches over him like a worried older brother. Then, in episode 5 of season 4, we get the conversation about the fear of telling the truth. During a conversation with Mike, Will subtly says that telling the truth isn't easy, because you don't know how the others will react, or whether they like it or not. With this line, Will starts to think that maybe it'll be better to finally say what he feels. But he doesn't know how to do it without losing the people he cares about. By episode 8 of season 4, Will finds the way to tell Mike how he feels without being direct. While they're inside the van, Will finally gives Mike the drawing. He talks about Eleven, but he starts crying. That's because what he's really talking about is himself. Even in the drawing, we can see Mike holding a heart-shaped shield. And honestly, friends, this is the moment where Will fully accepts that Mike will never love him back. Throughout this entire conversation, Jonathan realizes just how much his brother is suffering because of Mike. That's why in the final episode, when Mike and Eleven are eating pizza at the restaurant, Will watches them from afar, looking sad. Jonathan steps in and offers his support, telling him that no matter what happens, he'll never leave him and will always be there for him, because he always knew about Will. In season 5, we see Will growing very close to Robin. And as we know, she also hid her feelings for girls for a long time. Robin becomes a huge source of support for Will, helping him understand himself and communicate what he feels to the people he loves. Every conversation with Robin works like a mirror. Robin talks about signs, unrequited love, and how hard it is to accept yourself. Will listens closely because he sees himself in everything she says, until he finally says it. And in episode 7, Will gathers the courage to bring everyone together and tell them how he truly feels. Some are surprised, but Jonathan and Robin already saw it coming. Here, Will finally lets go of his fear and accepts who he is. And in the final episode, we see that he finally finds a love that is returned, and at last gets to be happy. And there you have it, friends. Stranger Things never hid who Will Byers was. The ending doesn't reveal anything new. It simply confirms what the show had been telling us from the very beginning. Let me know what you thought about Will Byers' story, and whether you noticed it from the start. We'll be reading your comments.